feel like it's a useful time to talk about how we set personal boundaries or a lack of setting personal boundaries, but more specifically, how setting personal healthy boundaries is a kindness to those around you. And by those around you, I mean those that you work with, your colleagues, those closest to you personally, your family, in literally every aspect. And I speak to this from a position of having a history of not setting personal or healthy boundaries in the past. This is something that I have personally worked on in the last couple of years more consciously. So those boundaries are more present there for me in the last few years than they would have been, say, 3, 4, or 5 years ago. And the fear that a lot of people, or that I had in setting those healthy boundaries, and I keep saying healthy boundaries, I don't mean pushing people away, I mean healthy boundaries like your fence line, that you can take care of your yard in that. And but the fear that can come into that is a fear of coming across in the wrong way when you have that conversation, or the fear of having the conversation itself, or the fear of damaging the connection with the other person or people involved. And that also comes from a people-pleasing tendency as well. So if you're at work and you're constantly saying yes, even if it's impacting other really important aspects of your life, whether it's your energy or your personal life, at the expense of, it's at the expense of your personal life to say yes at work, that can be a lack of a healthy boundary to say, actually, that's outside of work hours, and while sometimes I'm okay with it, it cannot be all the time, as an example, because it's impacting my partnership or my marriage or my time with my kids or whatever it is. They are areas to look at where a lack of boundaries is impacting you, and where it's impacting other connections. So one of the best analogies I have ever been given is, I call it the rock the boat analogy. And I got this one in therapy. You're getting it for free. You're welcome. But the analogy is, if you are so afraid to rock the boat, so we all know that rock the boat part. If you're so afraid to rock the boat by having a challenging conversation and saying, this is actually too much for me, or this is what I need, you'll never know if the boat is able to withstand or avoid being capsized. You'll never know the size of the waves the boat can handle without being capsized, because you're so fearful of it being capsized by a tiny little conversation. And when you learn to have some of those conversations and rock the boat, you learn how robust that connection or that relationship is. And that is a more powerful thing for that relationship. And remember, I'm talking about any kind of relationship. So it can be a personal relationship, or it can be one at work, one with your boss. I'm really fortunate to have had experience with the boss where I could be upfront and clear and say, that feels like a lot for me. Is there another way that we can look at how we balance that out? Or ask the questions of, how long do you foresee this happening or going on, like being a need for, because I can put in the hard work now. However, there needs to be a point where it levels out. So when you are able to have those conversations that might rock the boat a little and might feel a little destabilizing, you get the opportunity to see how robust that boat can be, or you learn that that boat can be robust if you didn't see it before. But what else happens when we set healthy boundaries with another is we remove the onus being on them It says, I'm willing to take care of my needs, and you can relax knowing that I'll actually ask for what I need when it comes up, rather than you having to guess what it is and spend energy on assuming that or overdoing it just in case, or rather than it getting to a point where you're not aware because I haven't spoken up, and then resentment building because you're doing all of this extra work, or I'm doing all this extra work, depending on which way it goes. I'm doing all of this extra work, again, work-wise or otherwise. It can be energetic, emotional work, and there can be resentment that builds there if I don't actually say that that's too much for me, or that that's crossing my boundaries that probably should be there, and so far as how my energy is spent, or how I feel like you're using my energy. And that's the other thing that comes up in that as well, is when we don't tell other people our boundaries, they don't know that, and that can't be on them to know without us telling. But often when we don't tell them and they don't know, so they think that everything's okay, except it's not. So there can then be that resentment that builds because it's like, well, they always do this. It's like, well, have you told them or shown them that it's not okay? So healthy boundaries and setting them and communicating them, as scary as it can be, and if it feels scary, go back and watch my video about how communication can be uncomfortable and speaking even when your voice shakes. It can feel scary and it can feel uncomfortable, and it can be a little bit of that rocking the boat feeling between you and the other person or people, but there is a kindness to it because you're removing the need for them to spend energy guessing, or the assumption that everything is okay in a way that builds and creates an environment for resentment. So setting healthy boundaries is a kindness because it creates more robustness in that relationship, in that interaction, in that connection. Even though most often when someone doesn't set a healthy boundary, it can be in a fear of damaging the connection, or it can be in a misguided sense of what it means to take care of someone or someone's needs. And we can actually take care of each other's needs even more when we are first and foremost taking care of our own needs and speaking up and communicating what those needs are to begin with or along the way. So maybe hopefully you can consider a reframe of what those healthy boundaries mean, and what they can actually do for you in connection with another person. It can remove a sense of people pleasing, and that's a big task that's a big thing to overcome and tackle. So that takes time, as anything does. So be gentle with how you approach it and how you are able to practice it in the meantime. Be gentle with yourself in terms of your expectations. You may not get it straight away. You may not get it right straight away, but it is a kindness to those around you. It is a kindness to those you work with, to those you live with, to those you love and care for, and build friendships and connections with. It is a kindness there. So remove the word selfish, or change the definition of the word selfish in your mind when it comes to setting the boundaries, and see it as a kindness, because you're not asking anyone to overspend their energy, or you're not asking yourself to overspend your energy at the expense of the robustness or deepness of that connection.